Ready for a deep dive, folks? We're going deep into the history of Israel today.
Yeah. Should be fascinating. There's so much to unpack.
Definitely. And we've got Derek J. Penslar's book, Israel in History, as our guide, so no shortage of things to discuss.
Right. Penslar really digs deep.
He does, and one of the things he emphasizes is looking at Israel in comparative perspective.
Yeah, he wants us to understand Israeli history, not in isolation, but
No.
by looking at other nations, other historical movements.
It's about seeing those connections, the parallels, the things that might not be obvious at first glance.
Exactly.
And one of the things that jumped out at me early on was this idea of new history.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like, I don't know, a catchy slogan or something, but it represents a huge shift in how Israeli historians have been looking at their past.
It's like archaeology in a way. They're unearthing new layers of meaning.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Because for a long time, there was this, dominant narrative about certain events like the 1948 war.
Right, everyone kind of accepted that version of the story.
And then these new historians came along and they started digging into the archives. And what they found, well, it challenged that accepted story.
So it wasn't just about revising dates or battles won and lost?
No, not at all.
It was something much, much bigger.
Absolutely. This new history with scholars like Benny Morris, it brought in voices that had been largely unheard.
Okay, so whose voices are we talking about here?
Primarily Palestinian perspectives, especially on events like the Exodus in 1948.
So giving voice to those who hadn't had a chance to tell their side of the story.
Precisely. Like Penslar delves into the Deir Yassin massacre, where hundreds of Palestinians were killed. The new historians challenge the official accounts of what happened there.
And that's heavy stuff, bringing those events to light. I mean, I can only imagine the kind of impact that had.
Oh, it was a huge deal. It caused a national conversation about memory, about identity.
Because you're forcing people to reconsider what they thought they knew.
Exactly. And that can be a very uncomfortable process.
Yeah. And speaking of figures who've had a lasting impact on this whole story, we can't forget Theodore Herzl.
The father of modern Zionism.
Right. There's a lot of debate still about his vision, some even claiming his writings, even his novel Alt Newland, advocate for expelling Palestinians.
That's one of those historical myths Penslar really tries to unpack.
So what's the truth then?
Well, it's crucial to remember that Herzl was writing, in the late 19th, early 20th century, right?
Yeah, a very different time.
So his views, they reflect the complexities of that time. We can't just apply today's lens to a figure from the past.
That's a good point.
I mean, yeah, some of his ideas might seem jarring to a modern audience, but trying to categorize him as simply good or bad based on, today's definitions, it wouldn't be accurate.
So it's not as simple as saying he was for or against expulsion.
No, not at all. It's far more nuanced than that.
It's about trying to understand the context they were operating in.
Exactly. And that's what makes Penslar's approach so valuable.
He's not giving us easy answers or telling us what to think.
No, instead he's guiding us through these really complex historical figures and events, and he's always advocating for critical thinking over simplistic judgments.
So embrace the messiness, don't shy away from it.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got these new historians challenging established narratives. We've got complex figures like Herzl, whose ideas are still debated today. Where does Penslar take us next?
Well, next we go even deeper into the heart of Zionism itself. And Penslar tackles a question that's still hotly debated today. Was it simply colonialism in disguise?
Yeah, that's a question I've definitely wrestled with. Was Zionism just another form of colonialism? I mean, it's an accusation you hear pretty often, but I felt like Penslar really pushed back against that kind of simplistic view.
He does. I mean, he acknowledges that there are surface similarities. Like acquiring land, establishing settlements, those echoes are definitely there.
Right, on the surface level, it's easy to draw those parallels.
But he argues that when you look at the core motivations behind Zionism, they were fundamentally different from what was driving European colonialism.
Okay, so what were those core differences then? What set it apart?
Well, think about it. European colonialism, it was largely about resource extraction, right? Like economic exploitation, going to the new land and taking what you could get.
Right, it was all about profit, about exploiting resources and people.
Exactly. But Zionism, it was fueled by this centuries-old longing for a Jewish homeland, It was about finding a safe haven from persecution.
So more about refuge, about rebuilding, than about exploiting a new territory.
Exactly. And Penslar really emphasizes this fascinating aspect of the movement, this deep commitment to actually transforming the land, making it flourish again through agriculture and technology.
Oh, that's interesting. So it wasn't just about going and taking, it was about creating something new.
Exactly. He gives the example of the Hula Valley Drainage Project. Like, imagine early Zionists taking on this massive engineering endeavor to drain a swamp, turning it into fertile farmland.
Wow, I never really pictured Zionist pioneers as like engineers and agricultural innovators.
But that's what Penslar highlights. Figures like Arthur Ruppin, who was key in shaping early agricultural policy. These weren't just settlers, they were builders, driven by this utopian ideal.
It's a very different image than what usually comes to mind.
Right, and they saw technology as this vital tool, not just for, making life easier, but for nation building, for creating this self-sufficient and thriving society.
It's really fascinating how that challenge of rebuilding kind of fueled this spirit of innovation.
Absolutely.
So it was about reclaiming a homeland, but also about building something new, something that reflected their ideals.
Precisely. And Penslar draws these fascinating comparisons, between the way Zionist settlements were structured and the goals they had compared to those established by European powers.
Showing how different the approaches were.
Yeah, completely different. Like how they approached land use, labor, even their relationships with the existing populations. It was just a world of difference.
It really adds layers to this whole idea of Zionism, doesn't it? It wasn't just a reaction to persecution. It was this forward-looking project full of idealism and this belief in human ingenuity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for all this talk of nation building and historical forces, Penslar also uncovers this surprisingly human side to the story.
Oh, you're talking about the Hebrew satire he unearthed. That was a really fun part of the book.
Right. Who knew that digging into early 20th century Zionist history would involve laughing out loud?
Seriously, those sections were a delight.
They're so insightful. They offer this unique window into, the anxieties, the dreams, the just everyday realities of these early Zionists.
And the fact that they could find humor in it all, it's kind of amazing.
Right. Like Penslar shares excerpts from these satirical Haggadah, which are Passover texts, and they're poking fun at everything from like the Zionist Congress to the challenges of learning Hebrew.
Okay, give us a taste. What kind of jokes are we talking about here?
Well, like Penslar describes one Haggadah that portrays different Zionist leaders as characters from the Purim story.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's full of these witty comparisons and inside jokes. You really have to be familiar with both to get the full effect. But still, it's brilliant.
It's like a political cartoon, but in text form and infused with centuries of Jewish tradition.
Exactly. It shows this incredible self-awareness, this ability to laugh at themselves and that, sometimes absurd situations they found themselves in.
It humanizes the whole story, It reminds us that history isn't just made up of grand pronouncements and political maneuvering. It's the everyday lives of people.
Yes. Their struggles, their triumphs, and even their jokes.
And it's those little details that make history so fascinating.
Absolutely.
But Penslar doesn't stop there. He connects these seemingly disparate threads, taking us from scholarly debates to satirical Haggadah and then to radio waves.
Yeah, he does. And it's brilliant how he ties it all together. Because you have to remember, this is the early 20th century. Radio was the cutting edge of media.
Yeah, the internet of its day.
Exactly. And for a newly formed nation like Israel, it was incredibly powerful.
So it wasn't just about entertainment then, it was about something bigger.
Much bigger. Penslar argues that radio played this crucial role in promoting Hebrew language and culture, disseminating news and information, fostering this sense of shared identity in this fledgling nation.
Wow, so it was like a sonic nation-building project.
Precisely. They used it to broadcast everything, from political speeches to educational programs to original Hebrew music. Imagine the impact of hearing your own language, your own stories, your own music, broadcast across the airwaves for the first time.
It's like this incredible unifying force, right?
Yeah.
Creating this sense of connection and belonging.
Exactly. It was a powerful tool.
It's really amazing how Penslar brings all these different aspects of early Israeli life together. The satire, the technology, the radio.
It shows how multidimensional it all was, right?
Yeah, it's not just this one-dimensional story of political maneuvering. It's about culture. It's about people's everyday lives, their dreams, their anxieties.
And it underscores the fact that history isn't, some dusty old textbook. It's a living, breathing thing.
That's a story.
Exactly. Full of humor and heartbreak and, these moments of incredible innovation, this constant push and pull between tradition and progress.
Yeah, and all of that leads to, I think, a really important question, one that Penslar leaves us with.
It's a question that really stayed with me.
What is that question?
Well, if Zionism was as much about, creating this new society as it was about finding refuge, where does that leave Israel's identity in today's world?
It's a big question.
It is, especially in our globalized age, where the lines between cultures are constantly shifting.
Right, because on the one hand, you have this deep desire to preserve tradition, to hold on to the values that were so central to the Zionist project.
The language, the culture, the connection to the land.
Exactly. But at the same time, you can't escape the fact that Israel is part of a global community.
And that creates this really interesting tension.
So how do you reconcile those two impulses? How do you honor the past while embracing the future?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
There's no easy answer.
Definitely not, and it's something that each generation will have to grapple with in their own way.
But I think by understanding the complexities of its history, by engaging with works like Israel in history, it allows for a more, I don't know, a more nuanced and informed conversation.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation that goes far beyond just Israel, I think.
What do you mean?
Well, every nation, every community, right? We all wrestle with these questions of identity, of heritage, of how to navigate a changing world.
That's so true. It's a universal struggle.
And that's what makes Penslar's book so relevant. Even if you're not, a history buff, it gets you thinking.
It challenges your assumptions, makes you question what you thought you knew,
And it reminds us to be open to new perspectives.
to embrace the messiness of it all.
Exactly. Because history, it's not always neat and tidy. It's full of contradictions and complexities.
And it's those contradictions and complexities that make it so fascinating.
They make it human.
So if you're looking for a book that will challenge you, that will make you think, that will stay with you long after you finish reading it,
Then definitely check out Israel in History by Derek J. Penslar.
it's a journey worth taking.
It really is.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the complexities of Israeli history.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It really has, and we hope you'll continue exploring this and other intriguing topics with us.
Until next time.
Until next time.